Well, we've almost come full circle. And today, we're going to be tackling the cylinder head for hopefully the last time, at least for the foreseeable future. So without further ado, let's get started. Now our first step, we left this thing basically, we leak tested the valves, determined which ones were needed work, we lapped them in. We did not leak test them after lapping them, because it would be pointless to do so before replacing the seals, which will really be our first step here. And there's not much of a trick to these. You don't need to use comically oversized pliers, but I'm going to. And just kind of grab onto the head of the thing, pinch it, and then lift it straight up, and it should come off all in one piece. You want to make sure that there's both a ring and a boot or a jacket, if that thing would ever focus. There you go. That's what they look like when they've been destroyed. And there's no way to remove these without destroying them, so don't even bother trying. Now they might kind of want to come apart on you. If they've been in there since 1987, they might not take too kindly to your intrusion. But these ones seem pretty fresh. I imagine, as I say, the previous owner had rebuilt the engine. But we got a new set with our rebuild kit, and there's no reason not to. So repeat this for all 16 valves. Now we clean the cylinder head. Now you don't need to use a comically undersized parts washer for this, but I'm going to. Now we want to kind of give it a visual inspection, just and try to wipe down any surfaces that you weren't able to reach previously. So I'm going to try to get the ends of the where the seals go, as well as any of the mated surfaces or anything you notice that has dust on it. Obviously, the outside of the cylinder head is much less important than the inside, but if you're nitpicky about appearances, this would be the time to clean it up. Now we can get the air hose, and I'm going to carefully get all the dirt and dust, anything that might still be in the oil passages. You don't need to get that stuff out. Now with everything clean, I've given this a visual inspection. I'm pretty confident that there's no giant gobs of Permatex or anything else lurking inside any of these oil passages. It's time to install our new seals. These just kind of push straight on. I think they're pretty hard to screw up. The ring side obviously goes down, the larger end faces down. And they'll definitely click into place. So then you'll know you've got it. Again, repeat this for all 16 valves. Now, when it comes time to install the valves, there are definitely some things you can do to make your life easier. For one, it's recommended in the factory service manual, but do make sure to grease your valve stem. And we also grease our cotters. The reason for that's actually going to help it to stick, to seat properly into the end of the valve stem once we get to that point. But you want to do it right now because you don't want to be trying to do this one-handed while you're trying to hold the valve spring compressor in place. Especially if you've got a super janky homemade valve compressor, like I do. So, first step is to install the lower valve spring retainers. Install the smaller one first. Then the larger one, doesn't matter what direction these go in. Now when you install your valve springs, do remember these are dual 2 spring per valve, and the tightly wound part points down towards the cylinder head, and there should be red marks up at the top. Now we take our greased up valve, we insert it from the bottom, and it should more or less stay in place. The grease will hold it. I wouldn't trust it too much, but anyway, it'll give us time to install our valve spring compressor. Again, this is my super janky homemade unit. I do not recommend doing this unless you are truly dedicated to the art of saving money. Now from here, let's see if I can get a slightly better angle on this. So now we can see the end of our valve stem through our little access there. And we're going to use our magnetized pick, and using a combination of patience and trial and error, we're going to position this so that it seats into the top of the valve stem. There. Now, maintaining control of the spring compressor, we can release this, move it out of the way, give it a visual to make sure it looks okay, and it is recommended grab yourself an appropriately sized hammer, just give this a little tap. It should feel springy, not solid. That one looks good. Now you obviously want to repeat this for all 16 valves, and I'm not even going to try to film that because that is going to take me forever. So I'll meet you back here in a couple of minutes. Now one other thing I forgot to mention, when you're doing this obviously, you don't want the cylinder head to topple over, so make sure you have something good and heavy on the cylinder head just to keep it in place. And one other little kind of trick is when we position the valve spring compressor, if we're having trouble with the cotters, we can actually use the valve spring compressor to our advantage. And how we do that is we can actually move it just slightly, and that's because the spring's flexible. It's going to move the spring while the valve's going to remain stationary. So that's going to be able to create gaps that are going to give us more room to get the cotter in. And once we've got the one half of the cotter in, we can move it back to the other side to create more room on the other side while simultaneously locking the first cotter in place. And really, it's gonna, first time you do this job, you're probably gonna have to practice a bit. But by the time you finish your first cylinder head, this job shouldn't really present any major challenges. Especially on an engine like this. This one's actually got super nice access. You can see everything we're doing. So, as I say, exactly the same way as before. I'm going to do a little leak test. So fill each one of the chambers with solvent. Now it's the next morning, and let's take a look. Looks perfect. So we didn't see any seeps. Everything looks pretty tight. So we'll dump it out, flip it over, and do the same for the exhaust. And now we're back to check out the exhaust valves. It's been about 12 hours later, and everything looks just fine. So no concerns at this point. And so as before, we can dump out the old solvent. It's definitely taken on a bit of a red tinge because it melted through a lot of that grease that we put on the valve stems. I don't think that'll be a concern. Not worth redoing at all. Now we can reattach the rocker arms onto little screw studs. The only real trick to this is that you actually have to turn this the wrong way, as if you're loosening it, in order to tighten the rocker arm onto the stud. Try not to cross thread it, obviously. But these things are pretty tough steel. Don't think they'd give all that easily. Now we're obviously going to be doing a valve job when we reassemble this, or once we basically get the engine back on the bike. So just kind of eyeball it, get it kind of close to the one next to it. Should be fine for now. And can we just take a minute to admire how beautiful these parts are? Just don't see these. As I say, you never see rocker arms in a modern, well, modern motorcycle engine at least. Yeah, they still run them in some cars. There. There's obviously no point tightening that down, because as I say, we're just going to be doing it once we adjust the valves anyway. Let's repeat this for all four corners. Now we install the alignment pins. Now for the alignment plates, I don't think these would necessarily be have a specific orientation, but you can tell from where the finish is worn how they were positioned previously. And it's equal effort to put them in that way as the other way, so you may as well install them the way they were before. Now we can go ahead and grease up the rocker arms. And we'll just paint a bit of grease on the bearing surface. A little splash of color. Starting to feel like Bob Ross. Now we install the flat springs, and Loctite wasn't listed in the factory service manual, but I noticed on the bolt that Loctite was used previously, so I used Loctite. And these get torqued down to 10 pound-feet. Now we can install our carb boots. This is one of the old ones. I did wind up ordering new ones on account of these things are completely destroyed. The rubber is just really, it's hardened and brittle. Basically crack it just by squeezing on it. The new ones are nice though. New ones. Nice and pliable. So it's obviously going to be a pretty cheap upgrade. It might last us a little longer and make getting the carbs on and off a lot easier in the future. One thing to note, I thought this had two part numbers. I thought there were two different parts. So like this MM5L, so reason that L was left. but if you look on the bottom side, it just says MM5R. So it's the same part. The orientation is determined by this little notch here, which fits around a small cutout to put in the casting. And when I ordered them, they did not come with the clips, so I have to reuse the old clips, which is fine. And there's a diagram in the factory service manual that explains kind of how these things are supposed to be orientated. Bit of an IQ test, really. One which I failed, struggled with for a while. This goes there. One of the screws at the bottom. Yeah, things you didn't expect to be difficult, but would be difficult. Figuring out which clips go where on these carb boots. Now back at the engine, we reinstall our alignment pins, as well as a fresh gasket. Leave the cam guide. Hold on. I managed to put it in upside down. There are no markings on this one, so be forgiven for that error. But you will notice the alignment pins won't let you install it upside down. So that's good to know. Kind of foolproof. So I'm kind of resting it so that I can pass the cam chain through. Now, once we get it down about halfway, we need to make sure to reinstall the cam chain guide. And more or less slot together like so. Confirm once again that your cam chain guide is in position. Everything was good to this point. Check your bench to make sure you didn't forget the alignment pins. Now this piece goes here, and every other stud gets a washer. You can see our one engine stud that was longer than the others. It's kind of cool. Now these nuts go on the inside, and the pretty looking ones go on the outside. Okay, so after struggling with it for a bit, I actually had kind of a satisfying nerd moment here. So see this piece? It's kind of odd. It's got folded up edges. It almost looks like a spout. Reason for that. So that's exactly what it is. So it sits here. The cam chain goes around it, and this gathers up the oil that's sloshing off that cam chain, and it focuses it, drips it like a spout right into the bowl of the cam chain tensioner. Now this doesn't show up in the original fiche. This is actually a retrofit. So whether or not it doesn't have a Honda part number on it, I'm not sure if it's an official retrofit or not. But this was clearly designed to help mitigate the problem with the rattling cam chain, with the loose cam chain tensioner. They would keep that tensioner more full of oil, which would in turn allow it to do its job a little better. So this little simple piece of sheet metal seems kind of useless. So I say the only reason I figured out it fit here is because that's the only place it would fit. And I'm sure if I went back to the disassembly videos, I would see that it goes here around the chain. And that is pretty darn cool. At least, I mean, I'm not a very good judge of what's cool, but the fact that someone at this point, whether it was a factory or someone figured out the problem and twisted a little piece of sheet metal to do the job for us. So we'll install that like so. The cam chain will go around it like this, and not sure if that's going to do anything for the rattle. Can't recall if this thing had a very serious rattle. I'm sure there are worse ones out there. But, yeah, I don't know. We can continue by dropping these bolts in. Now we'll want to tighten these in 2 to 3 stages. So we'll just go through that now. And these take 33 pound-feet. And of course, you don't want to forget the that funny little cylinder bolt. Torque spec's not listed. It's just going to go for Gutentight. Now back at the top, we can reinstall the cam chain tensioner. And we'll give these 10 pound-feet of torque. So, in preparation for the next step, which is going to be the camshaft installation, I've greased the bearing surfaces here. Clean the cam retainers to give them the final cleanup. Start with solvent, get all the exterior dirt out, and then to confirm that the oil passages are all clear, we can actually just jam the end of our parts washer hose into this oil passage, and we should see all of these start spraying solvent out. And something like that's just fine. Give it a quick towel dry. Then, while pointing this thing away from your face, use some fairly low pressure air. I think this is probably about 40 pounds. And just get that solvent out of there, just so it won't interfere with the grease. Repeat this for all 4 cam retainers. And now we do grease any of the contact surfaces. Now, before installing the camshafts, it is essential to make sure that we are at top dead center still. If you skip this step, you risk blowing up your engine. So. Now we reinstall the alignment pins. Along with the O-rings. These are new O-rings. They should come with your gasket kit. So the camshafts are marked. This, for example, is the exhaust camshaft, if that would ever focus. Whatever. And so the marking will go closest to cylinder 4. Here's the exhaust sprocket. And we can see the orientation based on how the metal's marked up. But these marks should point towards the cylinder 1. Likewise for the intake sprocket, or intake camshaft. Let's say something kind of like that. So we've got it now. We're sighting down from the left side of the engine, and we see that the exhaust mark lines up with the top of the cylinder head on the exhaust cam. And likewise, we see the intake mark. And that's about right for the intake cam. So, noting the marking on each one of the cam holders, we'll position these and tighten them down. Now starting with the exhaust camshaft, we confirm that the line lines up with the top of the cylinder head. And if you need to make adjustments, you can do so gently with a drift and kind of hit perpendicular to the direction rotation for the camshaft. And just gently like that. Then we do the same for the intake camshaft. So again, just kind of run the bolt in. No Loctite at this point. Just trying to make sure everything lines up before we proceed to the next step. And if this one needs adjustment, we can do so the same way we did the exhaust. Now that we're sure everything's lined up, we can go ahead and remove the both sprockets. Now we slide the timing chain over top of the exhaust camshaft sprocket. You don't want too much slack there, just a bit. Now for the intake sprocket, you're gonna have to jam a screwdriver down through the body of the tensioner and push down on that arm, and that's gonna give us a little bit more slack. If you're having trouble figuring out how this mechanism works, you can kind of lever onto the side of the tensioner arm and just watch the innards, and you'll be able to see the movable part, the part that you can push down on. But it takes a little bit of guess and test for this, and yeah, it's a little tricky. So we push down right there. And then again, some combination of luck and patience to be able to get that on there. Ooh, got it. There we go. Now we tighten this bolt. Now I'll just go hand tight for now, because we will be loosening these again after we confirm the timing. Now we rotate the engine counterclockwise until the lower two bolts are visible. And pay attention as you're doing this. You definitely don't want to be wrenching too hard if there was a timing issue. So it should all move pretty smoothly. Now we'll test rotate the engine. Again, it shouldn't feel like it's fighting you. And we can see the timing still looks good. So we can run these bolts back out. Now earlier I thought it was the red Loctite. Manual actually calls for just the standard centered Loctite. So red Loctite would be a mistake for reasons that it's a bit strange actually. I would have thought if there's any part of the engine that you really didn't want to come apart and it was spinning around, it'd be these. But yeah, I guess they're fine trusting it, and so are we. And these take 12 foot-pounds, but my torque wrench won't fit in there, so we're just going to go fairly tight. And again, 12 feet-pounds. Like that. That's it. Now we can fill the cam chain tensioner chamber up with fresh engine oil. Now we're going to install the cam chain guide. This attaches via the 4 socket head bolts. Now we can perform the valve adjustment. I got myself so these handy dandy, well, valve clearance wrenches here. Bought these a while back, never had a chance to use them. I've actually got a couple of bikes with adjustable valves. So I figured these would be a bit of a time saver. Provided they reach. Yeah, that's not gonna work. Alright. Now, in face of this situation, you can obviously try to just get a wrench on it, wrench on the jam nut, to loosen the nut, to do your adjustment, and then tighten it back down. I try not to do that. It tends to kind of round the nuts there, and we don't have a lot of access here. So, plan B is going to be to make our own tool. So we're going to start with the 10mm socket. Make sure that'll fit, which it will. Jam a screwdriver down the middle. And yeah, that'll work. So I'm going to take this to the bench grinder and grind a couple flat spots, something I can use to get a nut rounder on. Meet you back here in a couple minutes. Install it like so, and just make it fit a 14mm wrench. That's something. But anyway, so the exhaust valves spec is 6 thou. That's too tight. That's about where we want it. Now while holding the screwdriver in place, we just tighten this jam nut back down. There. Now we check the other valves. Now with the valve job done, we can reinstall our spark plugs. Well, we've got new spark plugs for it. Now we've cleaned off our valve cover, and we've got our valve cover gasket. If you're reusing your valve cover gasket, make sure to give it a close look over to make sure it's still in good enough shape. Now the service manual calls for a little bit of sealant just around these, I don't know, little protrusions or features. And you just want to go about 1 centimeter on either side. Then we install the valve cover, just being careful to ensure that, that the gasket remains in position. Now these little washers, they are actually direction specific. It's really tough to see. There's no way I would possibly be able to film that. But they do say up on them. So the rubber seal part points downwards, then the metal washer, I guess, the embedded metal washer goes on top. Now these call for 7 foot-pounds, which is basically nothing. Be surprised if your torque wrench can even accurately measure that low. So with that, our rebuild's basically complete. So we, to summarize, we did the top end, lapped in the valves, replaced the rings, replaced the mains, replaced all the O-rings, checked over all the major components. Didn't look like there was any problematic wear or any signs of oil starvations or any other real deal breakers with this engine. So we reassembled it to the best of our abilities, and yeah, I feel pretty confident that we got everything accomplished correctly. That said, you're going to have to deal with a little bit of suspense for now, because we're not really going to be able to, not going to be able to figure out if this thing's working until we actually turn the key and fire it up. And got a fair amount of work to do on the bike before we're able to get to that point. So, as I say, we're just going to have to live in suspense until then. But yeah, that'll basically wrap up the engine rebuild series. I might do one other kind of video just showing reinstallation of the engine. But in the meantime, kind of feels complete. Do want to thank y'all for watching. Any of y'all that stuck through it. I don't know how many episodes we're up to, but I imagine there's got to be a couple hours of footage here. So to the dedicated few that made it through it, I hope you learned something. Hope it was of some use to you. And if you have any insights or comments or things you notice I did horribly wrong, things I can improve, do hit that comment button below. But do appreciate your viewership. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.